Have you ever felt a shadow linger in a place long after the events that cast it? In 1848, Baton Rouge, an unsettling mystery unfolded, one that would not only disturb the city's streets, but penetrate the hidden corners of the human psyche. It was not just a disappearance, nor merely an unsolved incident. It was a confrontation with fear, guilt, and the unknown, a mirror reflecting the darkest recesses of both a society and the human soul. In the year 1848, Baton Rouge was a city teetering on the fragile edge of societal order, its streets lined with the vestiges of prosperity built upon the labor of enslaved people, its communities steeped in tension, suspicion, and quiet dread. It was in this atmosphere, already heavy with the weight of repression and unspoken anxieties, that the most disturbing slave mystery emerged, an event that would haunt the consciousness of the city for decades. What happened was not simply a crime or an accident that could be catalogued and forgotten. It was a disruption of the collective sense of reality, an encounter with the unknown that refused to be explained by law, logic, or conventional morality. The incident began in the quiet hours, a time when shadows stretched unnaturally across cobblestone streets and the boundaries between day and night, conscious and unconscious, seemed most porous. A young enslaved individual vanished without warning, leaving behind a household riddled with fear, a family unable to comprehend what had transpired, and neighbors who whispered of unnatural causes. The disappearance was initially treated as a simple case of someone running away, a possibility common in the region, yet the details that emerged slowly, fragmentarily, defied ordinary explanation. As the investigation unfolded, the evidence, or rather the gaps within it, began to suggest a reality far darker than the surface story allowed. Witnesses reported hearing sounds in the night, distant cries that seemed human but were distorted, echoing in the empty corridors of the plantation. Objects appeared in unusual places, footprints that led to nowhere, and a sense of being watched permeated the surrounding houses. It was as if the event itself had left a psychic imprint upon the environment, one that could be felt even by those who were not present at the initial moment of disappearance. The mystery was amplified by contradictions. One neighbor swore they had seen the missing individual near the river at midnight. Another claimed that the figure had been glimpsed in the fields, only to vanish moments later. These contradictions were not merely the product of faulty memory. They reflected the tension between the conscious mind, eager to impose order, and the unconscious, which manifests in forms that challenge understanding and provoke fear. The event took a more sinister turn when fragments of physical evidence emerged. Items belonging to the enslaved person found in locations that suggested struggle and resistance, yet with no signs of a struggle visible in the immediate surroundings. Some items appeared as though deliberately staged, creating an impression of misdirection and deliberate obfuscation. The inability to reconcile these pieces of evidence with a coherent narrative left the community unsettled, not only because of the missing individual, but because the rules governing reality seemed to bend or fracture. The incident revealed a tension between what was visible and what was concealed, a reminder that beneath the veneer of order lay chaotic, unpredictable forces that could disrupt life without warning. The enigmatic nature of the incident drew attention not only from law enforcement and neighbors, but also from a collective, almost archetypal fear embedded in the minds of the populace. Slavery had long imposed a psychological binary on society: master and subordinate, known and unknown, visible labor and hidden suffering. The sudden intrusion of a mystery into this rigid framework created a cognitive dissonance that was difficult to resolve. The community, accustomed to control and predictability, found itself confronted by the inexplicable, a rupture in the narrative of dominance that defined everyday life. In this sense, the incident was more than a disappearance. It was a manifestation of the repressed anxieties of the city itself, given form and voice through an event that refused to be ignored or rationalized. Rumors proliferated in the wake of the incident, each more sensational than the last, reflecting both the fears and projections of those who told them. Some spoke of hidden tunnels beneath the city, secretive gatherings, and even supernatural forces at work, as if the event had tapped into a collective unconscious where myths, fears, and moral reckonings converged. Every retelling of the mystery emphasized different aspects: the cries in the night, the inexplicable footprints, the feelings of being watched. The narrative became a mirror, reflecting the anxieties, guilt, and latent violence of the society in which it occurred. Each person who engaged with the story, consciously or unconsciously, was drawn into a confrontation with the shadow of their own psyche, the aspects of fear, moral uncertainty, and unacknowledged guilt that slavery had forced into the depths of consciousness. The enigmatic incident of 1848 thus represents more than a historical curiosity. It is a profound illustration of the ways in which events can resonate far beyond their immediate circumstances, touching on the unconscious fears and anxieties that shape human experience. It demonstrates how a single disruption, a disappearance, a moment of uncertainty, a crack in the fabric of reality, can reveal the hidden structures of power, repression, and psychic tension that govern a community. The incident's enduring power lies in its capacity to unsettle, to provoke reflection on the unseen forces that influence human behavior, and to illuminate the shadowy depths of society's collective psyche, where mystery, fear, and the unknown converge in ways that are both disturbing and revealing. The psychological shadow of slavery in 1848 Baton Rouge was not a mere backdrop to the mystery. It was an active, shaping force that permeated every interaction, every glance, every whispered word. Slavery was a system that imposed not only physical bondage, but a profound psychic imprisonment on both the enslaved and the enslavers, creating layers of repression, guilt, fear, and unacknowledged desire that coexisted in uneasy tension. The shadow, in this context, is not merely what is hidden from others, but also what is hidden from oneself. Those impulses, fears, and moral contradictions that cannot be reconciled within the conscious mind. For the enslaved, the shadow contained both the horror of oppression and the unexpressed rage, grief, and longing for freedom. For the enslavers, it held the knowledge of moral transgression, the fear of rebellion, and the suppressed recognition of humanity in those they claimed as property. The 1848 Baton Rouge mystery, in its deepest sense, was a manifestation of these intertwined shadows, a moment where repressed fears and moral tensions surfaced violently into reality, uncontainable and destabilizing. Within the enslaved community, the shadow manifested as both individual and collective tension. Daily life was structured around survival, obedience, and avoidance of punishment. Yet beneath this surface lay a turbulent inner world of suppressed emotions. The disappearance at the center of the mystery, the inexplicable movements, and the subtle signs of struggle were not merely accidents or chance events. They were expressions of the psychological and emotional strain imposed by constant subjugation. Each act of resistance, whether hidden in thought, whispered in secret conversations, or enacted in fleeting gestures of defiance, was a ripple of the shadow-seeking expression. The mystery illuminated the impossibility of fully containing the human spirit, demonstrating that even under the strictest control, the unconscious will find forms of expression, often in ways that surprise and unsettle those who believe themselves to be in complete authority. For the slaveholders, the shadow was equally powerful, though its contours were shaped differently. Living within a system that demanded the denial of empathy, morality, and recognition of the humanity of others, the slaveholders' unconscious minds absorbed guilt, fear, and the constant anticipation of loss of control. The mystery of the disappearance intensified these feelings, forcing a confrontation with aspects of their psyche they could neither fully acknowledge nor repress. Each rumor, every strange sound or unexplained movement, became a mirror reflecting the fears they had long buried. The possibility of rebellion, the exposure of their cruelty, the fragility of the social order they had worked to construct. In this sense, the mystery did not merely disturb the external world. It acted as a psychic catalyst, revealing the tensions, contradictions, and unprocessed traumas at the heart of Baton Rouge society. The psychological shadow also operated collectively, shaping the community's response to the event. Fear and superstition, already prevalent in the Antebellum South, intensified under the pressure of the unexplained. Reports of strange cries, unusual footprints, and inexplicable phenomena were amplified by a community primed to project the unknown onto archetypal fears. The shadow of slavery, the repression of moral accountability, the denial of common humanity, the fear of rebellion manifested in the collective imagination as ominous forces, as if the event itself were possessed by the weight of unacknowledged guilt and latent violence. Each interpretation, each rumor, reflected not simply ignorance or credulity, but a deeper engagement with the unconscious. A confrontation with the societal shadow that the conscious mind could not tolerate openly. Furthermore, the mystery exemplified the dynamic between the conscious and unconscious mind, where repression produces symptoms that surface in unexpected, sometimes terrifying ways. The vanished individual, the unexplained signs, and the rumors of supernatural intervention were not just external occurrences. They were symbolic expressions of the internal psychic tensions of a society structured around oppression. The shadow does not disappear because it is ignored. It seeks outlets, and when those outlets appear as mysterious, disturbing, or uncanny events, they command attention. The collective psyche, burdened by the moral contradictions and suppressed anxieties of slavery, projected these unresolved contents into the external world, transforming the disappearance into something mythic, archetypal, and enduring. Finally, the psychological shadow of slavery explains why the Baton Rouge mystery resonated so profoundly, not only at the time but for decades afterward. It was not simply the disappearance that disturbed people, but the revelation that beneath the ordered surfaces of everyday life lay a vast, uncharted terrain of fear, guilt, and suppressed human potential. The event illuminated the deep, unconscious currents shaping behavior, decisions, and interpretations, demonstrating that slavery inflicted wounds not only on bodies, but on minds, communities, and moral frameworks. The psychological shadow did not vanish with the resolution of the immediate mystery. It persisted, lurking in folklore, in memory, and in the lingering unease of a society confronted with the consequences of its own denial and repression. The incident, therefore, must be understood as a symbolic eruption of this shadow, a moment when what was hidden and unacknowledged could no longer be contained, demanding recognition and reflection, revealing that the true horror was not just in the visible acts of oppression, but in the unseen, unresolved psychic scars that slavery etched into the human experience. In 1848, Baton Rouge, the line between reality and imagination, the known and the unknown, was thinner than most people cared to admit. The mysterious events surrounding the disappearance of an enslaved individual were not merely understood through the lens of crime or misfortune. They were also interpreted through a dense web of superstition, folklore, and the pervasive belief in unseen forces. These beliefs were not simply irrational notions. They represented a way for the community to navigate a world rife with uncertainty, moral tension, and suppressed fear. Superstition acted as a bridge between the conscious mind and the deeper unconscious, providing a symbolic language for phenomena that could not be easily articulated. When the unexplained events began, the vanishing, the strange noises at night, the footprints leading nowhere, the minds of those involved instinctively reached for explanations that lay beyond reason, attributing the disturbances to forces both mystical and malevolent. The belief in unseen forces allowed the community to externalize the internal fears and anxieties that had long been repressed, turning psychological tension into something tangible, something that could be feared, warded against, or manipulated. The psychological significance of superstition in the Baton Rouge mystery lies in its ability to act as a mirror to the unconscious. In a society structured around slavery, where moral contradictions and suppressed guilt were daily realities, the unexplained could not merely be shrugged off. The community needed a narrative, however symbolic, to make sense of the events. Rumors of curses, ghosts, and dark magic filled the spaces left by uncertainty, providing a shared framework through which the collective mind could confront its anxieties. These supernatural explanations were often coded expressions of societal fear, fear of rebellion, fear of moral judgment, fear of disorder. The unseen forces, whether imagined or perceived, became a way for people to negotiate the hidden dynamics of power, control, and vulnerability, creating a landscape where psychological truths were projected onto the external world. Among the enslaved, superstition carried an additional layer of meaning, intertwined with strategies of survival and subtle resistance. Knowledge of charms, protective rituals, and whispered warnings was not simply an adherence to tradition. It was a language of power and concealment, a method of navigating a world where every gesture could have life or death consequences. The unseen forces in these narratives, spirits, omens, or ancestral guidance, were sometimes interpreted as allies, protectors, or agents of justice, allowing the oppressed to assert a form of psychological agency in a system that denied them control. The Baton Rouge mystery became fertile ground for these interpretations, as every unexplained occurrence could be read as a sign, a message, or a warning, creating a symbolic dialogue between the conscious and unconscious realms of the community. For the slaveholders and the wider white community, superstition functioned differently, but with equal intensity. It became a mechanism for managing fear, guilt, and uncertainty. Confronted with events that defied rational explanation, the mind projected hidden anxieties onto imagined forces that could be identified, feared, and symbolically combated. Ghosts, curses, and portents became vessels for the community's shadow, manifestations of moral corruption and suppressed dread. Each interpretation of the mysterious events was as much about the observer's internal state as about the external reality. The community's fixation on these unseen forces revealed a deep psychic fracture, a collective projection of guilt, vulnerability, and the latent terror that the structures of slavery were not as stable or impervious as they appeared. The interplay between superstition and fear also amplified the mystery itself, creating a feedback loop in which belief shaped perception. Strange sounds in the night were heard more acutely, fleeting shadows were interpreted as ominous figures, and the tiniest irregularities were read as signs of malevolent activity. These perceptions were not hallucinations in isolation. They were embedded in a shared context, shaped by cultural beliefs, social hierarchies, and psychological tension. The community's superstitious interpretations created an environment in which the mystery could flourish, taking on a life of its own and intensifying the emotional and psychic impact of the events. The supernatural became inseparable from reality, a lens through which every aspect of the incident could be examined and interpreted. Moreover, superstition in Baton Rouge served as a symbolic map of the unconscious. Every reported curse, every whispered omen reflected deeper truths about human experience under slavery. The repression of emotion, the unpredictability of fate, the fragility of social order, and the consequences of moral transgression. The mysterious events forced both enslaved and enslaver to confront these hidden dimensions, whether consciously or unconsciously, projecting their fears and hopes onto forces that were beyond their control. In this way, the unseen became an intermediary between reality and psyche, a way for the human mind to grapple with experiences too complex, too morally fraught, or too terrifying to be understood in purely rational terms. The Baton Rouge mystery of 1848, when viewed through the lens of unseen forces and superstition, illustrates how deeply human beings rely on symbolic frameworks to process trauma, moral ambiguity, and existential fear. The supernatural explanations that emerged were not simply primitive beliefs, but expressions of psychic tension, collective shadow, and the ongoing struggle to impose meaning on a world in which the ordinary rules of morality, justice, and safety were constantly undermined. The events, interpreted through superstition, transformed from isolated acts into a narrative of profound psychological resonance, revealing that the true mystery was not only in the disappearance itself, but in the complex interplay between the visible world and the unseen forces of the mind. In the disturbing mystery of 1848 Baton Rouge, one of the most psychologically resonant elements was the way the enslaved individuals involved were perceived through the lens of the archetype of the other. This archetype, deeply embedded in the collective psyche of human societies, represents everything that is alien, unknown, or threatening to the conscious ego, the part of the self and community that seeks control, order, and stability. In the context of slavery, the enslaved were cast as this archetypal other, a figure onto which fears, anxieties, and moral uncertainties were projected. They were seen simultaneously as invisible laborers and ominous presences, human beings reduced to objects of suspicion, fascination, and dread. The disappearance and ensuing mystery amplified this projection, transforming the individuals involved from real human beings into symbols that reflected the deeper psychological and cultural tensions of the society. What was happening in Baton Rouge was not merely a physical event, but a psychological one, a confrontation with an archetypal structure that demanded recognition and understanding, whether consciously or unconsciously. The archetype of the other is most potent when it embodies qualities that threaten the stability of the dominant culture or consciousness. In 1848 Baton Rouge, this archetype was intertwined with the fundamental insecurities of a society built on oppression. Slaveholders, confronted with the disappearance and the unknown forces surrounding it, projected their fears of rebellion, loss of control, and moral reckoning onto the enslaved individuals. Every unexplained action, every strange sighting became magnified, interpreted not merely as the behavior of a person, but as the manifestation of a threatening force beyond comprehension. This projection allowed the dominant society to maintain a sense of order by externalizing internal anxieties, yet it also magnified the terror and mystique surrounding the mystery, making ordinary acts of survival or resistance appear uncanny and ominous. The enslaved were no longer fully human in the perception of their oppressors. They had become archetypal symbols of the unknown, a repository for guilt, fear, and forbidden recognition. For the enslaved, the experience of being cast as the other was psychologically complex and multi-layered. While the dominant society projected fear and hostility onto them, this archetypal positioning also provided a form of symbolic power. Being othered meant that their existence had the capacity to disturb, to provoke reaction, to unsettle the rigid structures of control imposed upon them. The mystery itself, the disappearance, the unexplained signs, the perceived movements, can be understood as a moment when the archetypal power of the other was enacted, whether consciously or unconsciously. every ambiguous occurrence was charged with psychological significance, a subtle assertion of presence and agency in a context designed to erase both. The tension between visibility and invisibility, between agency and subjugation, was heightened by the community's projections, reinforcing the sense of mystery and amplifying the archetypal resonance of the events. The archetype of the other also functions on a collective level, shaping the cultural imagination and moral framework of a society. In Baton Rouge, the mysterious events surrounding the disappearance became a canvas upon which societal fears, anxieties, and unresolved moral tensions were painted. The community's obsession with the unseen, the uncanny, and the potentially malevolent reflects the dynamics of projection. The unconscious aspects of society were externalized onto the figures cast as other. These projections were not merely personal but communal, demonstrating how deeply archetypal structures influence the interpretation of events, the formation of rumors, and the collective sense of danger or threat. The enslaved individuals were not just participants in a historical event, but symbolic vessels through which the shadow of an entire community could be examined and understood. Moreover, the archetype of the other exposes the profound moral contradictions of slavery itself. By reducing human beings to symbols of fear and mystery, the dominant society denied both their humanity and the reality of its own culpability. The fear of the unknown, projected onto the enslaved, was in many ways a fear of the self, the recognition of suppressed guilt, latent anxiety, and the potential collapse of moral authority. Every step taken to control or interpret the mysterious events was simultaneously a step toward confronting the collective shadow. Yet this confrontation was avoided or distorted, resulting in heightened tension, superstition, and panic. The mystery became a psychological amplification of the social and moral dissonance embedded in the system of slavery, illustrating how archetypal structures shape not only perception, but social behavior, justice, and memory. Finally, the enduring resonance of the Baton Rouge mystery is inseparable from this archetypal framing. The events were not simply shocking because of their physical or factual elements. They were shocking because they activated the deep, unconscious structures of fear and projection inherent in human societies. The archetype of the other ensured that the mystery could not be contained or fully understood because it existed simultaneously as historical event, psychological drama, and symbolic reflection of collective shadow. In this way, the mystery transcended its immediate context, becoming a narrative that continues to resonate precisely because it taps into universal structures of fear, projection, and the encounter with the unknown. The enslaved individuals, cast as the other, became both real and symbolic, illustrating the profound interplay between human perception, archetypal imagination, and the moral and psychic complexities of a society built on oppression. The 1848 mystery in Baton Rouge did not unfold in isolation. It reverberated through the entire community, exposing fissures in both social order and moral cohesion. The disappearance and the strange, unexplained phenomena surrounding it became a catalyst for widespread panic, a collective psychological reaction that revealed the fragility of a society built on fear, hierarchy, and repression. Community panic is not simply a response to danger, it is a reflection of deeper anxieties, a mirror of the unresolved tensions, moral contradictions, and hidden guilt embedded within the social fabric. In Baton Rouge, the mysterious events activated these tensions, magnifying them until they could no longer be contained. The city became a theater in which not only the physical consequences of slavery, but also its moral and psychological costs were dramatized, with each reaction and rumor serving as evidence of a collective moral unraveling. Panic within the community manifested in multiple ways, from heightened vigilance to irrational suspicion and outright hysteria. Neighbors who had previously coexisted in relative order now interpreted ordinary occurrences, shadows in the night, distant noises, fleeting movements, as signs of imminent threat. The mysterious disappearance of the enslaved individual transformed the streets, fields, and homes into charged spaces imbued with uncertainty and dread. Every sound and every movement became a potential sign of rebellion or malevolent action as fear distorted perception. The mind's natural tendency to seek patterns and explanations in ambiguous circumstances led to a proliferation of rumors, each more sensational than the last, each reflecting a mixture of reality, projection, and imagination. The community's collective nervous system became hypersensitive, interpreting coincidence as conspiracy and minor anomalies as omens of collapse. The panic was closely intertwined with moral collapse. Slavery, as an institution, had already imposed a profound moral distortion, requiring the systematic dehumanization of others and the denial of basic ethical principles. When the mystery erupted, it became a mirror of these distortions, revealing the extent to which moral reasoning had been compromised by fear, self-interest, and denial. As panic spread, people resorted to scapegoating, seeking to assign blame to convenient targets rather than confronting the deeper truths about oppression and injustice. The disappearance was interpreted not simply as an event, but as a symptom of broader moral failure, a crack in the social order that threatened to expose the hidden costs of the city's hierarchical system. Hysteria became a social contagion, amplifying anxiety, reinforcing divisions, and eroding the structures that had previously maintained the illusion of control and stability. The dynamics of panic also reflect the Jungian concept of the collective shadow. The shadow of a community contains all the fears, guilt, and moral contradictions that the society refuses to acknowledge openly. In Baton Rouge, these elements were concentrated around slavery, the fear of rebellion, the awareness of cruelty, the guilt of exploiting human lives for economic gain. When the mysterious events occurred, they activated the collective shadow, bringing it into consciousness in the form of rumor, superstition, and exaggerated fear. The community's response, driven by the need to externalize these inner tensions, created a feedback loop in which panic and moral collapse reinforced each other. Each new interpretation, accusation, or suspicious sighting intensified the psychological contagion, ensuring that the community's internal conflicts were projected outward and magnified. The moral collapse was further intensified by the breakdown of trust and social cohesion. People who had previously relied on established hierarchies, law, and custom found themselves questioning the reliability of neighbors, colleagues, and even family members. Fear undermined empathy, rational judgment, and ethical reasoning, creating an environment in which suspicion and accusation became primary social tools. The disappearance and the surrounding mysterious phenomena acted as a catalyst, revealing how precarious social order can be when built on injustice, repression, and fear. The panic that engulfed Baton Rouge was not simply about a single event. It was an eruption of the collective anxieties, moral ambiguities, and latent tensions that had accumulated over decades of systemic oppression. The psychological impact of this moral collapse persisted long after the immediate events had passed. Even if the mystery were resolved or the physical facts clarified, the memory of panic, mistrust, and communal anxiety remained, leaving an imprint on the collective consciousness. The city had glimpsed the fragility of its own moral structure, the consequences of denial and repression, and the ease with which fear could override reason, compassion, and justice. In this way, the Baton Rouge mystery became more than a local incident. It was a symbolic illustration of the universal vulnerability of human societies to panic when their ethical foundations are compromised, when the collective shadow is unacknowledged, and when fear dominates over insight. The events of 1848 show that community panic and moral collapse are inseparable, feeding into each other in ways that transform ordinary social life into a psychological and ethical maelstrom. The mystery was a mirror held up to the city, reflecting not only the terror inspired by the unknown, but also the moral fragility that allowed fear to dominate perception, decision-making, and social interaction. By examining the community's response, one can trace the contours of the collective shadow, understanding how societal fear, unresolved guilt, and repressed moral awareness can erupt into hysteria, producing consequences that extend far beyond the initial event, shaping memory, folklore, and the very identity of a community. The most disturbing slave mystery of 1848, Baton Rouge, did not vanish with the passage of time. Its echoes persisted, woven into the fabric of memory, folklore, and the collective consciousness of the community. The enduring legacy of this event is not merely historical, it is profoundly symbolic, representing the unresolved tensions, moral contradictions, and psychological scars inflicted by slavery. The disappearance and the associated phenomena resonated far beyond their immediate circumstances, becoming a story that communities return to repeatedly, not only to recount facts, but to grapple with the deeper, often uncomfortable truths it reflected. This symbolic legacy reveals how certain events transcend the realm of empirical observation, entering the domain of the psyche, where they operate as archetypal narratives, carrying meaning and significance far beyond their original context. The Baton Rouge mystery, in particular, operates on multiple levels simultaneously, as an historical incident, as a reflection of collective fear, and as a symbolic map of moral and psychological complexities. The symbolic meaning of the mystery is inseparable from the trauma of slavery. Slavery imposed profound physical, emotional, and ethical distortions on everyone involved. For the enslaved, it created conditions of constant fear, forced obedience, and moral invisibility. For the enslavers, it generated guilt, denial, and the suppression of empathy. The disappearance, and the strange, inexplicable occurrences that surrounded it, can be understood as an eruption of the suppressed, unresolved psychic material embedded in the system itself. The mystery functioned as a mirror, reflecting back to the community the moral and psychological consequences of a society built on dehumanization. The enduring legacy lies in how the story forces successive generations to confront these truths, consciously or unconsciously, demonstrating that events rooted in injustice continue to exert influence long after the physical circumstances have changed. One aspect of this legacy is the way the mystery became embedded in collective memory and folklore. Stories of the disappearance, strange noises at night, and mysterious sightings were retold, embellished, and transmitted across families and communities. Each retelling carried layers of symbolic meaning, reflecting the fears, guilt, and moral questions of the storytellers as much as the facts of the original incident. These narratives often depicted the enslaved individuals as mysterious, almost supernatural presences, blurring the line between reality and myth. This transformation from historical event to legend illustrates the Jungian concept of archetypal resonance. The story persisted not because of the external facts alone, but because it activated universal psychological patterns, the unknown, the shadow, the other, and these patterns continued to resonate in the collective unconscious of the community. The symbolic dimension ensured that the mystery could not be contained within the pages of history. It lived on in imagination, shaping the moral and psychological landscape of Baton Rouge long after the event itself. The enduring legacy also includes a moral and psychological dimension. The mystery functions as a reminder of the consequences of repression, injustice, and moral avoidance. The unresolved aspects of the disappearance reflect the unresolved moral and psychic tensions of the society, And in this sense, the story carries an implicit warning. Injustice and unacknowledged wrongdoing leave traces that persist in unexpected ways. The community's obsession with the unexplained, the strange, and the potentially malevolent can be seen as a manifestation of the collective shadow, a reminder that unresolved fear, guilt, and ethical compromise are never fully eradicated. They are projected outward, experienced as disturbance, uncertainty, and anxiety, and return to consciousness in symbolic form. The Baton Rouge mystery thus serves as both historical account and moral parable, teaching that the unresolved consequences of oppression continue to ripple through time, shaping perception, behavior, and collective identity. On a deeper level, the enduring symbolic meaning of the mystery relates to the human confrontation with the unknown. The disappearance and its associated phenomena presented events that could not be fully explained, understood, or controlled, compelling the community to engage with uncertainty, fear, and the limits of human comprehension. This encounter with the unknown is a fundamental aspect of psychological and spiritual growth, as it forces a confrontation with aspects of the self and society that are normally repressed or ignored. In the case of Baton Rouge, the mystery's symbolic resonance lies in its capacity to illuminate these hidden dimensions, revealing how societies respond when confronted with moral, ethical, and psychological crises. The story's persistence is thus not a curiosity or anomaly. It is a testimony to the deep ways in which human consciousness grapples with injustice, fear, and the unknown. Finally, the legacy of the 1848 mystery demonstrates the interplay between historical fact and psychological truth. While historians may attempt to reconstruct events with precision, the story's symbolic power transcends factual accuracy, operating within the realm of archetypal meaning. The disappearance becomes a lens through which the collective psyche examines slavery's moral and psychological consequences, the dynamics of fear, and the fragility of social and ethical structures. Its endurance in memory and folklore is a testament to the potency of symbolic truth, showing that events resonate not merely because of what happened, but because of the way they reveal universal patterns of fear, repression, moral tension, and the human struggle to confront the shadow. The Baton Rouge mystery, therefore, is not only a historical enigma, but also an enduring psychological and symbolic narrative, a story that continues to illuminate the unseen, unresolved, and morally complex dimensions of human experience.